Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Thanks so much for being with us here today on day one of this two-part discussion series on tackling the information disorder in Asia. I'm Ramati. I am a senior researcher at LearnAsia, and I'm one of the researchers on the research team that's put this together. Before we start the session proper, just a quick note for anybody who wants to use Russian language interpretation. As the graphic shows, you can click on, you can see a globe icon that should be on your control panel. You can click that and use the Russian option and listen to the proceedings via our interpreter. You can also, during the Q&A of the panels, you'll be able to ask questions on the chat function. So if you want to type in Russian, that's fine as well. Our interpreter, Azamat, will translate them and post them back in English. As Milinda said earlier, this session is being recorded, but that is for internal purposes only, just for our record keeping. We are not making this public in any way, shape, or form. So before we get on to the two panel discussions we have today, I'm just going to spend maybe about 10 minutes introducing this research to you and really setting the context for what we're going to be talking about in our panel discussions over the next 2 days. So just to introduce ourselves a little bit first, LearnAsia is a pro-poor, pro-market think tank. We focus largely on digital policy, infrastructure, and regulation issues. We usually work in about 11 or so countries, as you can see from the map, but we substantially expanded scope for this research, and we ended up working in about 26 geographies. So we work largely on themes such as connectivity issues and what kind of digital life people have once they actually, once they actually get online. And we hope the sort of experience that people would have in the emerging Asia Pacific is one that is economically empowering and rights respecting. And of course, the information disorder is something that can affect that in a negative way. So that's really how we kind of segue into this research. So just to introduce the context of this specific research. So how this sort of came about for us and also some of the partners in our network, who I'll talk to you about in a moment, is that while the problem of information disorder has been gaining a lot of traction, a lot of the research done on this is still very much situated in the global north, although we increasingly have lots of scholars in the global south who are now really working on this in their own national context. So this study is really part of a global Southwest consortium. We are headed by Herman Wasserman, our principal investigator, who's based at the University of Cape Town. And our other partners are the Internet Lab, who deals with the Latin American region, ARIJ, the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, who work on Middle East and North Africa, RIA, Research ICT Africa, who works in Sub-Saharan Africa, and of course us, LearnAsia, for the Asian region. And our work is supported by the International Development Research Center in Canada. So just to take a moment to acknowledge the broader network that we're a part of for this research and also our supporters. So the aim of this research was really to map as comprehensively and systematically as possible the nature of the information disorder and the measures and the efforts that are taken to counter it in the Asian region. So what did we end up doing in Asia? So we conducted 80 plus key informant interviews with fact checkers, journalists, policymakers, academics, and other stakeholders working in the Asian region to really understand their firsthand experiences. Many of you in the audience and also on panels today took part in this research. So thanks again for all your contributions. And then we paired this with desk research, which includes global, regional, country-specific literature, both academic and gray literature that focused on theoretical frameworks, legal landscapes, modes, and actors of information disorder. As we mentioned earlier, we had a geographical scope of 26 geographies across Central Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and also East Asia, as shown on the slide. So just to define what is information disorder, so we took what's now becoming a popular framing by Wardle and Direction from 2017, which defines disinformation, which is false information deliberately used to cause harm, misinformation, which is false information, but not always created with the intent of causing harm, and malinformation, which is information, that might be based in reality, but it's used to inflict harm. So of course, as you can tell, information disorder, this is not a new phenomenon, right? We have seen versions of this in many ways, shapes and forms. But I guess what's different in the present context is that the advent of the internet and social media have made it much easier to spread a higher volume of this information faster, and of course, with greater reach. So in the Asian region, we observe that information disorder arises around many topics, but two of the biggest topics are really politics and health. And in the political arena, we do see a lot of organized disinformation campaigns that are either state-backed or at minimum aligned to a political party. So for instance, sorry, IT cells in India, troll factories in the Philippines, buzzers in Indonesia, and so on. And often these will try to influence a political outcome, such as an election, or drum up support for maybe a legislative issue. Health, of course, it's received a lot of attention due to COVID-19, but health misinformation has existed before. But in recent years, many prominent topics of disinformation on COVID vaccines, fake cures, which are sometimes linked to nationalist sentiments, and of course, state-backed disinformation that seeks to sometimes distort figures on cures, figures on casualties, cases, deaths, and so on, or the promotion of fake cures. So for instance, in Kyrgyzstan, we saw the president and health minister publicly endorsing a toxic root as a cure for COVID, despite World Health Organization warnings. So in terms of how it spreads, certainly, as we pointed out earlier, this spreads through both digital and non-digital means, so it's not new per se. So social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, and also Twitter, Instagram, etc., are popular conduits for the spread of information disorder. But also we have country-specific digital applications, for example, KakaoTalk, very popular in South Korea, Zalo in Vietnam, and of course, these have a role to play. And certainly non-digital means of communication and even traditional media can be means through which information disorder spreads. So social media platforms have taken actions in recent years to try and combat the information disorder. For example, content moderation policies, attempting to track coordinated inauthentic behavior and so on. But these actions can still often be slow and have misalignment with country context. So for one example, we've seen online disinformation and hate speech that has an impact on offline violence, with a prominent example being in terms of violence against Rohingya Muslims in Vietnam. Hate speech was observed online on Facebook beforehand. We also know that online platforms sometimes tend to lack contextual information on countries in Asia, and some content policies fail to work well within an Asian context. We'll get into this more in the panels, but one example is, for instance, Facebook's 2019 decision not to fact check statements made by politicians did meet with some criticism in Asia because the political arena and political figures can themselves be a source of disinformation. Another worrying trend that has been observed by some journalists and academics working in Asia has been the use of digital labor and online jobs boards to hire workers to perform misinformation and disinformation campaigns. So one example that has been uncovered by journalists in Pakistan has been the hiring of actors and voiceovers to promote criticism of India, praise of Pakistan, and to advocate the China-Pakistan economic corridor. In terms of the traditional media spread of information disorder, there are several factors that can contribute to this. One very obvious one can be the culture of censorship, and we'll get into that context in a little while soon. But this can be linked to pressure, either official or unofficial, from the government or political parties to follow a certain narrative. Sometimes it's to do with funding sources. So for instance, we observed in Uzbekistan, state media being unable to criticize the government or question policies because they are fully dependent on government funding. It could also be down to simply a lack of resources and funding for independent media organizations, which constrains their ability to put out high quality content, or poor media ethics practices, which can arise due to, again, lack of resources or just lack of awareness. So we talked a bit about censorship. So just to give you an idea of the context of press freedom in the region. So we know that censorship can fuel information disorder if the state attempts to impose control over information flows. So what you see in this chart here is the situation of press freedom in Asia. This is taken from Reporters Without Borders 2021 World Press Freedom Index. So what we did was we took the geographies that we studied and we put them into this table based on the RSF categorization. As you can see, the situation of press freedom in Asia is not that good. None of the geographies that we studied actually achieved the good situation ranking in the RSF index. The highest was satisfactory situation, achieved by only South Korea and Taiwan. Then we have a couple of geographies in problematic situations, so not as good as satisfactory situation, but sort of in the middle. But as you can see, most of the geographies fall into difficult situation, which means that there are not insignificant constraints on press freedom in this context. And of course, we have some in the extremely serious situation. You can see a similar thing in the Freedom House Global Freedom Status Report, which we took from Freedom House's 2021 report. So they have three categorizations: free, partly free, and not free. And they use a range of indicators to try to measure political rights and civil liberties in countries across the globe. So again, only 4 geographies actually ranked as free in this rating out of the ones we studied when we looked at the Freedom House report. Most are partly free, and you've also got the rest in not free. So that there is a constraint with regard to this kind of environment. However, not all doom and gloom. Many types of actions have been taken against the information disorder. Many of you here today have been taking those actions yourselves. These include fact-checking, media and digital literacy campaigns. Of course, many measures taken by digital platforms and social media platforms, funders and networks who offer capacity building and financial support. And of course, much work done by researchers and journalists to uncover the nature of organized disinformation campaigns through research and journalism. Somewhat controversially, we've also had laws passed to deal with the information disorder, which has stirred up a lot of debate about whether regulation has a place here and the impact on the freedom of expression. But what we really have to figure out is, we know some of the measures that are taking place, but what works, right? How do we know whether these measures are having an effect? How can we do better in the future? What are we doing well right now? So the aim of really this whole discussion series is to bring together the experts in these fields to talk about what do some of these measures do well at the moment or not, depending on your view. What are the challenges in implementing some of these measures? And of course, how can we improve in the future? So having set that context, let's get started with our panel discussions. So just to let you know how the panel discussions will be formatted. At the beginning of each discussion, we will do a very short presentation of our report findings on each topic. This shouldn't take hopefully more than 5 minutes or so. And then we will remove our slides, introduce the moderators, and then the panel can get going. So I will just really quickly present to you the main report findings on fact checking, and then I'll get out of the way so we can have our panel. So we observed several different types of fact-checking models used across the region. We mainly identified 3 types of fact-checking organizations broadly. One type of organization, they're standalone fact checkers. That means the main purpose of this organization is to fact check. There might be other activities around it, but by definition, they are fact checkers. The second type are fact-checking arms of maybe a nonprofit or a media organization or a news outlet, where the main purpose of the outlet is something else, but they also have an active fact-checking operation. Thirdly, we have state-affiliated fact-checking outfits, which emerge out of government ministries and so on. The choice of topics are context-driven for the fact checkers. So depending on the context, some fact checkers choose to focus on maybe statements made by only certain entities, let's say government officials. Others have other criteria. They look for virality or social importance of the statement. Sometimes the fact-checking campaigns can arise due to needs identified in a certain context, say an election or something in the national context that made the fact checkers think this is an important thing to do. We also see collaborations and partnerships across the fact-checking landscape. So for instance, like we mentioned earlier, social media platforms and fact-checking organizations do have partnerships, and this gives an advantage to social media platforms because they're able to work with people who have local knowledge and local country context in content moderation proceedings and so on. Some fact checkers partner with traditional media, for example, newspapers, to disseminate their fact checks. So we've seen in some cases, a newspaper will run a small section with the important fact checks of the day or something like that. However, there are challenges in fact checking. One difficulty that many of you spoke to us about was the lack of trained fact checkers and difficulty in actually finding human capital. And some of you also spoke to us about the language barriers. So for instance, if reliable sources, perhaps medical documents might be in English, you need to have someone who can translate it from English into the local language and then perform the fact check. And such individuals aren't always available. Accessing official data can be a struggle. Maybe it's due to lack of government transparency, again, language issues, or maybe just lack of open data. Like it's hard to find things in the public domain. Others noted having to rely on conventional tools. For example, newer tools such as algorithms aren't always, compatible with the local context, maybe because they haven't been trained on a local language. So those tools can't be used all of the time. Lack of systematic approach to measure the impact and reach of fact-checking was another issue. Of course, difficulty finding long-term core funding to sustain operations. Many spoke to us how they often got by on either short-term grants or because they were part of another organization, the bigger organization would funnel funding in. Then, of course, state-backed fact-checking can be quite controversial because it can some state organizations use the charge of fake news to then apply to dissenters and to silence dissenters, sorry. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen and I'll introduce Helani Galpaye. She's the CEO of LearnAsia and she'll be moderating our panel on fact-checking. So let us give this over to Helani.
Thank you, Ramati. Excited to have a really good panel representing 4 different countries and people who have been really engaged in countering the information disorder for a long time. Some who have been on the research side and in fact-checking, others who have been in journalism, which has a lot of fact-checking, but also formal fact-checking, some who are part of larger networks, some who work with the large content social media platforms. So it's quite a variety. And what we will do is ask all the panelists to talk about their work, challenges, particularly what their model of fact-checking is, to give an overview. 4 minutes, maximum 5 minutes, and I'll try to ring a bell or something and really cut you off. And then we will open it up for discussions. And I also have a few questions that I'm dying to ask, but we will give priority to the audience questions. So let us get started with Ellen Kristani from Indonesia, from Liputan6.com. Very happy to have you, Ellen. And I believe, yes, you're using 2 slides. I think the other panelists.
3 slides, actually.
3 slides. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Indonesia. My name is Ellen Kristanti. I am Deputy Editor-in-Chief and the Fact Check Program Manager at Liputan6.com. Liputan6.com is a news portal. Our fact-checking operation started in the early 2018. In June of the same year, we became one of the IFCN signatory. We operate in Indonesia, a country that is very highly diverse and whose people are vulnerable to division. First slide, please. Okay. Indonesia has total population of 278.7 million with 204.7 active internet users and 191.4 social media users. There are so many challenges we face. First, Indonesian internet user lack media literacy, making them prone to misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Since 2008 to 2017, Indonesia has become more politically polarized, which impact the rejection of government policies, including the COVID-19 vaccination. Indonesia's social media platforms are fertile ground for disinformation or hoaxes. The majority of fake news spread on encrypted WhatsApp Messenger. Some people live in remote areas without internet access. However, that does not mean they are immune from fake news. In February 2021, residents of a hamlet in Alor fled to forest and beach to avoid inoculation after receiving information by word of mouth that vaccine can kill. And fake news and hate speech potentially spike in Indonesia ahead of election, actually in every election, including the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Next slide, please. Our main fact check team consists of 6 people. Their job description is to verify and debunk false information circulating on social media and also WhatsApp group. They also provide fact check training for students and general public. In order to verify the false information circulated in a WhatsApp group, we invite direct public participation by creating Pegiat Cek Fakta or WhatsApp Hoaxbuster activists in the early 2020. There are 15 groups in 10 regions of Indonesia with around 2,000 members. The members have a role to report suspicious information spreading in social media or chat app and share fact-check content produced by our team in their respective WhatsApp groups. We disseminate our fact-check content in our website, liputan6.com, social media, WhatsApp group, WhatsApp chatbot, and also radio community network. Next slide, please. There are 3 activities in our fact-check program. First is content production. We always try to make fact-check content as creative as possible and easy for people to digest in the form of article in local languages, video, animation, comics, and millennial-friendly fact-check video. But however, this content are still less viral than the fake news. Activity number 2 is fact-check training and media literacy. Liputan 6 believes that the fight against hoax can be carried out massively and more effectively by providing literacy to the broader community. That's why we conduct some online class and also fact-check training. We also do direct fact-check campaign in urban area to the remote areas, in some remote areas in Indonesia. And number 3 is collaboration. For us, the collaboration is the key for our success to fight hoax and misinformation, and also malinformation. We collaborate with Cek Fakta. Cek Fakta is a collaboration of 24 medias and also civil societies, including Mavindo. We also collaborate with Indonesian Radio Community Network to disseminate our fact-check content, and also with SCTV. We also collaborate with WhatsApp to provide WhatsApp chatbot so that people can easily verify the information that they receive from WhatsApp. That's from me, Helani. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Ellen, and beautifully stuck to time with 30 seconds remaining as well. Can I then invite Ms. Dulam Korlu Bater or Duya Bater from the Nest Center in Mongolia to talk about your work and again address in particular sort of how things work and the challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the time, Helani. Do you think I could just share my screen from here? I think I'm allowed to do that already. Yeah, I'll just do that. So Mongolian Fact Checking, my name is firstly Duya Bater. I'm the co-founder of Mongolian Fact Checking Center, which operates under Nest Center. So out of the the different types of fact-checking operations that Ramati just mentioned. We are a fact-checking operation that is operating under another NGO, which has a broader focus and broader mission. So Mongolian Fact-Checking Center works to take proactive and reactive approaches to combat misinformation online. In order to do that, we do employ several types of approaches, and we do several types of activities in order to reach our goal. So we are quite a very young operation in Mongolia. We were established in 2020, so we are 2 years into that. We became IFCN signatory in 2021. So tomorrow is our 1-year anniversary, and just yesterday we announced our partnership with Facebook, which is probably one of the topics that we will be covering today, fact-checking organizations, partnerships with tech giants. Our main approach is not only to take reactive approaches and work after misinformation has already been spread and people have already been exposed to that. Although we concentrate a lot on that, we are also shifting our focus starting from 2022 to take more proactive approaches to help newsrooms find a way of preventing misinformation from being created and spread in the first place, preventing general public from sharing and being vulnerable to misinformation in the first place. So out of all the approaches that Ramati just mentioned, we do advocacy works. For instance, in the beginning of this year, we carried out a campaign, mostly social media campaign called Think First, asking every people to think before they click on the share button, think before they tell somebody of some piece of information that they found and have not verified. And we also do trainings for volunteer fact checkers, journalists and newsrooms. So this year in September, we're planning to take a more aggressive approach where we are planning to expand our newsroom training operation. Yeah, that's pretty much how we work. And what do we stand for? Mongolian Fact-Checking Center has been onboarded by Facebook or Meta to work in the information ecosystem of both Mongolia and Kazakhstan. Because in terms of our freedom of press index, Mongolia is probably the only country in the Central Asian region that has better or somewhat free press according to the Freedom House Index. Although we did move 22 places back this year, still the state of press freedom in Mongolia is better compared to the other Central Asian countries. That's why we have been now onboarded by Meta to also work in Kazakhstan's information space. And we do believe that in terms of a democracy actor, in terms of promoting democracy and freedom to information, we do have a role to play in the Central Asian region. And and we have some plans to expand into the broader Central Asia region and play this role of the importance of freedom of press and right to information in the region. I think that's it for me for now. Thanks, Eleni.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Duya. And I think we'll move straight on to Mr. Kararuddin Shishir from AFP Fact Check, which operates in many countries, and he is with AFP Fact Check in Bangladesh.
Hi, everyone. So hope everyone is doing okay. So I'm Kararuddin Shishir, working for AFP Fact Check in Bangladesh. So previously, I have worked with 2 other organizations. In fact, I have established the first fact-checking organization of Bangladesh in 2017. It's called BD Fact Check. So I have been working in the space for more than 5 years, and now working as a third-party partner with Facebook as part of AFP's fact-checking team. So AFP is currently world's most, AFP is the largest fact-checking operation in the world with more than 125 fact checkers, and we are working in more than 80 countries and 24 languages. In Bangladesh, AFP has Bengali language service fact-checking and also English language fact-checking portal. So we basically focus on 3 types of misinformation. Number 1 is political, number 2 religious misinformation, and the third is health misinformation. We do all kind of hoaxes, but our prime focus is on these 3 topics. So almost every week we come across lots of disinformation, political disinformation, and that are primarily orchestrated by the state-sponsored actors. So in Bangladesh, in last 10 years, we saw several people were killed due to a false Facebook post. Lots of people lost their homes, especially minorities. And in our country, minority means Hindus. Basically, the primary minority community is Hindu. So lots of people, more than 100 people had their homes gutted, arsoned last year during a communal clash in Bangladesh, and that was triggered by a fake news. So this is the situation we are working here. We basically focus on important and impactful content. We don't take a silly Facebook post to fact check, but rather we try to measure the impact of the post, how many people is sharing it, how many people, we use monitoring tools provided by Facebook and other fact-checking monitoring tools. So we measure the virality, but the impact of a content on online platforms, and then we decide which content is most impactful, is going to have impact on real life, on the real life of the people. So we try to measure the impact, and then we select what is to fact check or not. So to do this, and especially doing fact-checking political claims is a challenging job. And 2 days back, we had published a fact-checking article that was posted by top government officials. And after fact-checking the claim, we have been going through the hit that people were on social media was targeting us targeting us with smear campaigns. That's all. So this kind of thing, we have been cautious for the last 2 days to use social media, and even yesterday I have to go to my home from office with an extra bit of caution that I can be targeted if someone recognizes me on the road. So this kind of thing happens, and among these kind of challenges, we are working in a country like Bangladesh. So if you have any kind of question, I can answer later. By this time, I said this from my experience of fact-checking.
Thank you, Qadruddin. Appreciate that, and appreciate the risks a lot of fact checkers take in doing their job. And finally, let's move to Ellen Tordesias from Vera Files in the Philippines.
All right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, good afternoon here from my end. I'm Ellen Tordesillas of VeraFiles. VeraFiles is a 14-year-old nonprofit media organization based in the Philippines that takes a deeper look on current issues. VeraFiles started fact-checking in 2016 during the election campaign, which was won by Rodrigo Duterte, who will be stepping down from the presidency end of this month. VeraFiles has two fact-check projects. One is fact-checking public officials, personalities. That includes officials of the government as well as private individuals who have considerable influence on the public. We track false claims of these personalities and debunk them with factual evidence. The project is supported by the National Endowment for Democracy. VeraFiles is also one of the 3 third-party fact-checkers of Meta, formerly known as Facebook, in the Philippines. I'll tell you more about the fact-checking with Facebook later, but let me go back to first to fact-checking public figures. Aside from debunking false claims, we also monitor flip-flops, the changing of one's position on important issues like death penalty, which is common among politicians. We also do fact sheets or explainers. A fact sheet does not debunk. It gives a brief history and deeper background of the issue at hand. We did a lot of that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and recently we did one on monkeypox. Now to the Facebook partnership. As third-party fact checker of Facebook, we don't delete nor block posts. It's a misconception that earns us a lot of hate mails and threats. As third-party fact checker, we just rate and label viral posts that we have identified as false, fake, misleading, need context, and unproven or no basis. When we rate a post as false, Facebook lowers the post in its news feed, thus visibility of the post is reduced. The poster is notified of the rating. Anyone who shares the post gets a notification, including the recipient, that it has been tagged by VeraFiles as false and leads him or her to our site where it shows our fact check, which explains why the post has been labeled as false. Now, are the sanctions effective? Facebook says 95% of the time a user encounters a fact check label, they don't go on to share or engage with that post. Now, why do we fact check? Number one, because we must. The wild west nature of social media where everybody can publish without going through the process of verification that institutional media employs allows this information to flourish. We must stop that and or at least lessen the toxicity of the environment that we live in. And number two, to hold people in power accountable for the information or disinformation that they spread. And number three, fact-checking is journalism in public interest. To empower the public with correct information that hopefully would help guide them in making decisions. The results of the recent Philippine elections, where Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the late dictator, won by a commanding lead, showed us the enormity of the problem of disinformation in the country. It was a humbling experience for us, fact-checkers. We were reminded of the need to listen more to the people and learn how to communicate with them effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Very interesting points brought up by you and the other speakers. We will start off with a really challenging question posed by one of our on the chat, which you probably could see, and I'll add to that. This is coming from Nalaka Gunawardana, who you will hear from later in one, I believe, the next panel. But he's asking the full panel that, you know, this is about sort of human beings and behavior. Fact-checking is important, but there's a huge assumption that the audience values facts and are open-minded to hear the data, analysis, or the clarifications, right? and particularly analysis, clarification, and data that go against their belief systems, right? So it may not be accepted. We know from research conducted using Twitter at MIT several years ago that the sensational and false news spreads faster and wider. And it tends to be more exciting than the quote unquote truth, which spreads a lot slower and far less. So how do we achieve the speed, reach, and virality of falsehoods? How do we compete with that? And how do you compete with that? I would like actually anyone who wants to start first to really address this. This is the core, I mean, at the heart of this problem that we are trying to achieve.
So can I
Yes, please,
take it?
Karthik.
So this is a great question, and fact checkers and who are working to tackle misinformation has this a problem or dilemma that they are working to counter misinformation, but misinformation are actually defeating them in terms of reaching the readers. But recently, participation of tech giants, especially social media giants, in the process of fact checking, somewhat contributed to this cause. When a fact checking Facebook post is debunked or detected as false information by third-party fact checkers, then Facebook or Twitter or TikTok has a system to inform the audience who already saw this post that this information is debunked as false. So this is a system, but this is not foolproof. This how they can reach everyone who came across the misinformation in the first place. But this practice or this measure take some have some impact to inform the users who are spreading misinformation. So whoever posted it, whoever shared it, will get notification from Facebook or TikTok, and then he will be knowing that the information he believed as true actually is false. So this is how social media giants is contributing in this cause, but this is not the ultimate thing that we can say. Fake news is fact check is outpacing fake news.
That's right.
So
I mean, Ellen talked about, that's right, Kadruddin. Ellen talked in her, intervention about, there is clearly research evidence and Facebook's own evidence that says if you tag something, then people are less likely to share. But the problem is they are also less likely to share the actual counter story. And you may, if you shared it, you get a notification, but you just saw it, you formed a mental image and you moved on. That tweet is long gone, but your mind has changed because of false information, and we are not addressing that. I know, Ellen, you wanted to come in on this.
Right. Yeah, I think with speed, there's nothing we can do about it because as the research of First Draft, it takes at least 12 to 14 hours for you to finish your debunking, right? And there's nothing much, and we cannot do anything about it because we need to make sure that our fact check is correct, right? We cannot use unverified data to fact check a false claim. I mean, that would be more disastrous if our own fact check would turn out to be false, right? So meanwhile, within the 12 hours that we're working on our fact checks, which could be longer depending on the access to information. Because in our case, sometimes it takes really takes at least 2 days because of the difficulty of access to information, given that our government is not really very transparent with official records. So that, I think, I don't know if we've made representations with Facebook that for false claims that have been repeated several times, could they at least do something about it? Like, sometimes a false claim is we have already fact checked it, and yet other accounts repost it, and we're thinking, is there a way that you can, since we have already fact checked it, can you at least not allow it to be reposted? We have made that representation with Facebook, but yeah, I think because if we don't, we cannot compete when it comes to speed, but at least as long as we maintain our credibility, I think that's the most important. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes. And it is exactly that time period where it might actually do the most damage, right? After
Yes.
12 hours, you might actually have it nicely tagged.
Correct. Yeah.
Julia, a quick intervention from you if you need.
Great, thank you for the time. So this is one thing that we struggle the most as consumers. We try to put on different hats and kind of respond to the fact checks that we produce. So as consumers, it's really not interesting. It's not something that you want to spend your mornings reading, the reports that we produce. So I think as fact checkers, we have to be open, and we have to keep an open mind to the fact that it's not such an attractive content from the consumer perspective. And at Nest Center, which is the parent organization of Mongolian Fact Checking Center, we do several studies and interviews to understand how people consume information. And what we are seeing is the fact-checking content has to probably adapt a little bit without compromising the quality, as Ellen said very truly. Because in order to win time or in order to become interesting, we cannot compromise the quality of our fact checks. That will make everything nonsense. So one approach that we're testing at Mongolian Fact Checking Center is, without changing the content or what we are saying, we are testing these new tools and ideas of changing the format that we're delivering the fact checks. Many fact-checking organizations historically have tried television broadcasts, but those are also quite lengthy. And whereas misinformation has only one goal, to move you away from some information that actually matters, or just to entertain you, or just to, they most often have just one goal, whereas we have so many principles, we have so many boxes that we have to tick. So it makes what our final product very uninteresting. So so we have been trying Facebook Reels, short videos, and Facebook Stories, and those have been gaining a lot of attention from public. And yes, it's true that we cannot include all the facts in a 30-second reel, but it does kind of give us a certain result in terms of attracting younger audience who actually understand the importance of true information. And it serves a big purpose in terms of raising awareness that misinformation exists on social media. So that's the experience that we can share at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, playing their own game, right? The short 20-second videos or the 20-second YouTube short, colorful things that make it a little bit more exciting and place in this attention economy where everyone thinks in short sound bites. Ellen.
In Indonesia, people are divided into three groups. The first group of supporter of the government, they will trust the government without a doubt. And the second one is opposition. They reject every information, every policy from the government. And the number three is anyone in the middle. So we are targeting more in the middle. I mean, people not supporter or every supporter from government or the opposition. And unfortunately, people who are in between, they are still the majority of Indonesian people right here. So that's why we are targeting more on them, because it's like very tiring for us to, let's say, like to convince the supporter group or opposition group to do or to believe our fact check content or something like that. So we are more targeting on them. And we are more targeting on people who live in the remote areas by, in collaboration with a radio network. And then we're trying to, in our fact check campaign, we have discussion with some religious and also traditional leader. We discuss to them and we tell them the danger of fake news and the impact of fake news. And then they, some religious leader or some traditional leader, they will use some local wisdom and also some verses from the Quran to convince their people not to, trust to any suspicious information like false fake news. That's why from the first question is very good question for us. That's our challenge. But in Liputan6.com, we are targeting more on people in between, not supporter, open supporter, or not opposition. Thank you.
That's right. And I think sort of running through this is the need to address, sort of give out knowledge in the way people can consume it with credit, and who's credible as a counter fact check. It might be the local leader. I mean, these are very hard things to systematize. And also, I guess at the heart of this, what we're not talking about here is a literate and sort of media savvy population who understand the nature of truth and sort of the probability that a statement is correct. We'll get to that in another panel. I want to get to the challenge of actually data and with quick interventions, because there's another question I'm dying to ask you. But, one of the biggest problems we repeatedly hear is that we don't have published data we can reference to counter this. The country grew 25% its economy during the last 10 years. Even something as straightforward as that sometimes is not easy to even mark as possibly untrue. How do you deal with this? And particularly tell me, what are the one or two government policies, or how do we change the lack of credible data? Because you can surely talk to people, but that also is an opinion and often not a good enough thing to say that XYZ said that, or is it good enough? Tell me about how you verify with actual facts and data, and how do we change the lack of data?
Can I quickly jump in about what we did, just one experience that we did. So I think in terms of finding data, I think all our answers are the same, but about changing how difficult it is to find data was one of the things that we did this campaign called, roughly translating would be Own Your Rights, where we challenged the government for not disclosing certain data that the law states should be open. So we did I think almost a 6-month information campaign on social media, informing the public about how it's not okay that piece of information is not online. So this led to a court decision enforcing the government to disclose those data, although it hasn't happened yet. I think this is helping a lot to kind of energize the public and letting them know it's okay that they can challenge the government and that they can demand that piece of information to be open. Just to be very quick. Thank you.
Yeah. So getting others to actually demand this as the public, because they have a right to open data. Yes. Anyone else wants to add on this? How important are open government policies? We know it doesn't really work in most of the countries, right? I mean, people put very old data out there. Do these at least help? What about right to information? Those things, I mean, do they just work on a different time scale, so it's not really useful for a fact check? An RTI can take a long time. Ellen, you wanted to come in?
We have been fighting for the passage of the bill on the right to information, but it has, the legislators are not so keen about it, so it's there sleeping in the Congress. Duterte passed his right to information. It's not really a law, because it's just instruction that he passed on to cover only the executive department. But we tried it and it didn't work. It just turned out to be a delaying tactic. Like we tried to use the right to information to get his medical records, and we didn't get it. So nothing. It's really, so we just have to what you call this, to go through the experts debunk their claims. So it's a problem. It's number one problem actually, access to information. Although it is in our constitution the right of the people to be informed. We always invoke that, but it really depends who is in power.
Maybe based on our experience in the from the past, the government, we cannot trust 100% of government data. So sometimes we get the data from other sources like NGO, academics, university, or any other organization. Yeah, I think we face the same problem with the data.
There's another question which I think we have to take on in the panel on sort of media digital literacy, and that's coming from Dr. Ibrahim Roman from Indonesia, really talking about the massive polarization in Indonesia between Sebongs, those who support government, and Kadruns, who are the opposing party. I think, Ellen, you addressed that as a fundamental problem. How do we address this? I mean, this really goes back to, in a way, Nalaka's question as well. With such existing societal polarization, you're not likely to believe anything that that party says. And Ellen, you hinted at possibly using who is a credible source in your mind for your party, like the local leader, and maybe working with you. Given we have 4 minutes, I'd like to get to my last question, which is really about funding and survival and credibility. Ramati pointed out what we found, that foreign funding is really essential to most of the fact checkers, because there just isn't sustainable funding. Even the foreign funding comes in the form of projects, and they'll fund you to, fact check health, but not something else. But along with foreign funding comes the very easy targeting in polarized countries of you are an agent of, name the government that funds you, right? A CIA agent or whatever. So how do you deal with that? And really, let's go into solutions. How do you think we should be funding fact checking? I mean, I keep thinking in the old telecom days when, even now with not enough people using the internet, there were universal service funds, a really imperfect mechanisms where you taxed essentially the telecom operators, and you're supposed to spend that money to connect the unconnected, right? Would that kind of mechanism work when we can't even tax social media companies, right? And spend it on, let's say, digital literacy. And yeah, how do we address the funding challenges here? Ellen, you're on mute.
How I wish I have the solution to that, because that's our constant problem. Because every year we, you know how funding, how grants are. It's only good for 1 year or 2 years. So it's a constant search for funds. So, but as of now, I think, you're right about being labeled as as foreign agent, CIA, because we get our funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which some of the government sympathizers say is it's a CIA, what you call that? It's a CIA conduit, but I do not know. We just ignore it. As long as they do not prevent us from receiving we came out with an explainer saying that it's not illegal to accept foreign grants. Even the government has receives foreign grants. So it's just what you call that? It's just a matter of credibility. So we said our piece. So to us, it's our words speak for ourselves. So you cannot. And if that's the only thing that they attack us with, that means we're doing well.
Sure. Yes.
So but it's how I wish we could have some generous soul who can give us, say, about 20 million pesos, and then we just have we call it just a fund where we can draw from permanently. We tried exploring local funding, but it's difficult because of the conflict of interest, because those who have money are in business, and if you're in business, you are you cannot afford to displease the government. So definitely.
right. Exactly. So, I mean, it really boils down to the rule of law and the freedoms people have to express their voice, right? Otherwise, you can use funding to throttle you as well, which is also then the danger of getting government funding, for example. We've got 1 minute, I'll say. I'll ask my last question, which is, given that you all are all in this business of fact checking and changing the way people think about truth and improving transparency and democracy, and facing a lot of challenges, in one sentence, tell me, if you can change one thing about the environment, about the way you work, about anything, what would it be that would improve the impact of your work? Ellen, can I start with you? Or Duya, you look ready.
Okay, I was just gonna kind of tie it to the previous question, because Ellen also mentioned
One
that
sentence.
okay, abundance of longer term money. So
Longer
not
term
just 1 or 2
sustainable funding.
years. Yeah.
Got it. Great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Kazuddin.
Yeah, it's related to funding, and I will try to crowdsource my funding. So this is the thing, because if I can do that, this will improve my work overall.
So if fact checking has a value, the citizens should be willing to pay at least a little bit towards it. That seems like an interesting model. Yes. Ellen.
Yeah. I mean, I want everybody to be fact checkers. I mean, fact checking should not only be the job of professional fact checkers. Everybody should learn how to fact check and should fact check.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Ellen, you have the last word.
Funding is our biggest challenge, yes. But with or without any funding, I think LiputanSix.com, we are committed to do the fact check and also to do our fact check campaign and digital literacy.
Thank you. So many things we didn't explore, but a strong call for funding related to the panel we are having tomorrow about funding and priorities and the challenges on the ground people face, and really a call to arms for funding and fact-checking from the people. Thank you very much, Ramati. I'll hand over to you. Thank you to the wonderful panelists for participating today. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Right, thanks so much, everyone, for such a great panel. Very much appreciate all of your comments and your insights. So let's move on to our second panel discussion and our second theme, which is on digital and media literacy. So as I said earlier, we'll take a few minutes to explore this theme a little bit and talk about some of the report findings, and then we'll hand it over to our panel to continue the discussion. So digital and media literacy, it's a very broad topic. I know some of you kind of touched on this theme in the previous panel as well. But what we have observed in the Asian region is a range of programs which are aimed at different ways of teaching digital and media literacy and tailored to the needs of different targeted audiences. So the people who conduct digital and media literacy training programs, it can be a wide range. So for example, some are civil society organizations, universities and academics might be doing it as part of their education curriculum or on a freelance basis. So schools will teach these too. Then, of course, fact-checking organizations, as some of you already talked about some of your digital literacy-related interventions. So certainly there's an overlap in that topic as well. Traditional media and sometimes there's government-backed digital and media literacy programs as well. These can come in a range of formats. So for example, if it's being taught in a school curriculum, it will probably be integrated into the syllabus, but sometimes it's maybe like a weekend course if it's for a general audience, or a short-term kind of course that you can follow in a variety of formats. These courses also cater to various audiences. So we've seen some that target students, so in school or in universities. Sometimes it's good media practices and good media ethics training for journalists. Sometimes it's just for the general public, or there might be a specific community level or grassroots campaign. So for example, if there's a particular issue that's affecting maybe a community of a certain ethnicity or gender and so on and so forth, or maybe a rural or urban context, some programs will be targeted to this as well. However, these programs, of course, do face challenges. One is, the design challenge that comes with all of this, right? How do we customize the training program to best suit the audience needs? Then, this topic of how do we tackle confirmation biases and polarization? We talked about this in the fact check panel as well, right? How do we help people to overcome those biases so that they can think critically about information, even if it goes against what their belief system or what they might have been trained to think. Then we have this broader problem of dealing with lack of trust in journalists and traditional media, in especially high censorship environments where there's a tendency to either discredit the press or reporting is distorted due to perverse financial incentives or censorship. There's this issue of trust as well. Like, how do we educate people to find reliable sources? And of course, the censorious political environment not only limits journalism, it can limit what can even be taught in the first place. So that is all from us to talk about the findings. So now I will introduce Nalaka Gunawardana, who will be the moderator of this panel discussion. Nalaka is an extremely, very highly experienced science and technology writer and also a media analyst. So we're very happy to have him here today. Just unfortunately, we will be missing Pirongrong Ramasutta, who was supposed to be on our panel. She is having to deal with a last moment medical emergency in her family. So sadly, we are missing her, but we are very happy to have Nalaka and our other two panelists. So we'll hand it over to you all for the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramati, and hi, everyone. At the end of the last panel, Ellen from the Philippines asked, can we train everyone to be a fact checker? Or she expressed a wish that everyone can and should be a fact checker. And that's where we are going to pick up and take it forward. Can we actually get every consumer, every user of information to be assessing that information's reliability, that information's trustworthiness, and its factfulness, to use a term that I'm fond of using, factfulness. Can we train people to be less gullible or to be more skeptical? That is the aim of digital literacy and media literacy. And we just heard from Ramati's quick summary that there are different methodologies used for that, but also there are many challenges. So we will today explore some of those challenges. And I have two panelists. We were to have three, but as you just heard, our colleague, our panelist from Thailand is unable to join us. So we have joining us Dilrukshi Handunnetti, a senior journalist and currently the executive director of the Center for Investigative Reporting in Sri Lanka. And we have Masato Kajimoto. He is an associate professor of practice at the Journalism and Media Studies Center at University of Hong Kong. So welcome Dilrukshi and Masato. Rather than asking you to make opening remarks, I thought I'll have an engagement with each of you and then with both of you. And after that, open out to audience questions. So audience, please pose your questions as we speak, and we will come to your questions after 15-20 minutes. Dilrukshi, if I may start with you.
Yes.
And with investigative journalism or investigative reporting, Now, at the moment, the center you head, it promotes investigative journalism in Sri Lanka as well as South Asia. Parallel to this, you are also addressing information disorder, or you are trying to counter disinformation. How do you address this?
Did I lose the connection? Sorry. It's really good to be on this panel, and particularly I would like to say this, Nalaka, before I get started. Masato his work has been one of the biggest inspirations for the center. He probably wouldn't know, but we definitely follow and absorb a lot of his the knowledge that he generates. So I would like to acknowledge that at the very outset. So how do we? Yes, we are an investigative journalism center, but you just as you said in your introduction, all of us cannot be fact checkers, right? And we are not going to use these digital verification tools. But if you look at journalists are used to verifying information, or rather they are expected to verify information. And the tools have changed, evolved, become more digital, because the media landscape that we work in has got so digitized that there is no way to escape the reality that much of the information that you have to deal with is coming from a different space, a digital space. So you are part of that ecosystem. So investigative journalism today is really required to be responsive to the socio-technical systems. There is no way that you can avoid the tech platforms and the information that gets in there. So how do we deal with that? So investigative journalism is also supposed to be mission driven, right? It's supposed to be mission driven journalism. And when you, at the core of it, you find verification as the absolute basis of the work you do as any journalist, and it gets harder when you're an investigative journalist. And there is a lot of amplification by the online influence industry that we have to eternally deal with on a daily basis when you're working on stories, when you work on reporting. So what we do is we took on the challenge, knowing that we are not a fact-checking organization, but in order to establish some essential, you really need to have some building blocks for you to start investigative journalism. And where did we see people making the biggest mistakes? We saw people just following a hoax. Give you a quick example. The Indian Foreign Secretary, there was a tweet attributed to the Indian Foreign Secretary recently, saying that I would like to, if the Sri Lankan people are willing, we would like to consider the country as, part of India. So the kind of virality, the kind of belief, and even I saw journalists sharing this, and that was really alarming to know that this is where our level of information literacy is, and we really need to be cautious, and we really need to know before you share that, before you retweet or share that, and add to the confusion that is already there. There's a cacophony of information that you have to deal with. So what is fake news to us? That was really fake, but we also identify it by 3 characteristics. We say it has to be factually inaccurate. It's also framed for a purpose and optimized for shareability. So these 3 things have to be borne in mind. Why we do this is because it's really essential for journalists to have not just regular verification tools, which we generally use, but also to use the digital tools, because there is the media landscape is definitely situated within the digital space. So you need to understand that that's the space in which we work in. So you really have to have the tools. But I'll go back to the opening line that you had. There is no way that we can educate everyone. How do we do it? Something that we can pick up in our conversation.
Right. So that particular Indian tweet, which turned out to be a complete fabrication. It was never issued, never uttered, but it was widely shared, including, as you said, by some journalists in Sri Lanka, which is my next point. Now, journalists are professionally trained to be skeptical, but these days we find that some, not all, journalists also peddle disinformation, maybe to attract more retweets or to gain virality. Without applying their skills, they also become part of the problem.
Yes.
how should journalism training tackle this? Both pre-service training and in-service training. How can journalists be told that you of all people can't do this?
The biggest problem we probably face is what you just mentioned, Nalaka. I think the desire to be the first to break the news. News has got so fragmented, right? The news has got so fragmented. You also raised that previous question, whether people really want to hear what we want to say, whether they really place that much of importance on the integrity of information that we seem to be so religiously concerned about. This is a very good question to raise. But journalists are also in that breaking news culture. They are actually fragmenting the news and are sharers of your influence. You're a conversation starter, you're an influencer. Your influence and the conversation you start should be founded on principles of journalism, of responsibility, of social responsibility. Even before you become a journalist, you have to be a responsible person. So what should we talk about? We always talk about defending free speech is a core aspect of what we want to discuss and what we want to share with journalists. And inform self-governing citizens, I think that's really the important thing. When you're self-governing, this is all about self-governing, right? When you want to retweet that, when you stop, pause, think. We do say, like, stop, pause and think. There was also another example of this child malnutrition, the possibility of children being malnourished in Sri Lanka because of the economic crisis. So why do we contribute to this problem is that journalists have to be first self-aware, then use many tools. And I've also seen at Professor Masato's lab, there are a lot of little tools that we look at them and talk about them and do talk to people why we need to first be cautious and remember the journalistic principles. It's not because once you lose your credibility as a journalist, that's a huge problem, because once you tweet that wrong tweet, share it, retweet that, I think people will remember, because there is also a requirement. A good question is that whether people want that integrity of information, but when there are people that I want to follow both of you for a reason. I think the information that you share will be credible, and it's important for me to receive that information. There is something to be gained from that. So that is really the crux, and that is also where we are different to any other regular person who is tweeting or sharing, and encourage deliberation on policy, public policy, and we are also supposed to be serving the public interest. For you to do that, you have to be responsible.
Okay, so in the IDRC study, Meeting the Challenges of Information Disorder in the Global South, where all three of us took part and we were interviewed, you are quoted as saying, and I quote, "Information disorder related to COVID-19 can lead to life or death situations," unquote. Would you say COVID or the related infodemic was an eye-opener or a turning point for all of us to realize how harmful disinformation can be?
I think so, Nalaka. At that time, in the previous panel also, it was mentioned that there is, trust deficit. There is a huge trust deficit about journalists and about journalism, how we behave, what we share as by way of information. So in that backdrop, there comes a pandemic, and during the pandemic, I think we were looking to people who were responsible sharers of information, because that became really very critical. That we came to a point where we could not really afford. It's not about a choice we make. It was about a very conscious decision we made in our minds that we will follow the people who will be truthful. And factfulness, as you said, that people who will be factful and truthful and be responsible about the information they are going to share, because we are talking about a virus that none of us knew about. We have never lived through a pandemic. So we have no previous reference point. We don't have a reference point. So in such a situation, only holistic information can be helpful to us. In that, we saw in different countries, different concoctions being promoted, and we also contributed, journalists also contributed to driving vaccine hesitancy. And at a situation where you have a global pandemic, and people are really encouraged to be vaccinated, And we would end up asking about, am I going to get a chip if I get vaccinated? Is there going to be some kind of chip, planted in my brain, or am I going to die in 5 years? These were the hoax theories. And it's also we also saw a large scale, like huge increase in conspiracy theories. As we understand, during any time of, when there is an information incident and there is information disorder, these things happen. So I definitely think it drove the point home that you got to be responsible in your information sharing, because it was about choices we are going to make about vaccines, about our health, our policies, and how we're going to vaccinate people, whether there was equity and justice in all of that. And in doing so, I think journalists, responsible journalists, were also rated higher at that time. I saw how the trustworthiness of the source of information became such an important thing because of the pandemic.
Okay, so let's hope that the lessons of the pandemic will be internalized, will be incorporated into how journalists and others are trained in verification skills, in digital and media literacy skills, and that as the pandemic recedes from our day-to-day concerns, the lessons of the infodemic are not forgotten. And in fact, we need to carry it forward. Let me turn to Masato now. Masato, is good journalism the answer to information disorder? Because this is something we increasingly hear from promoters of journalism, those who teach, those who research, those who are in media development. And good journalism is the antidote for disinformation. What's your take on it?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I would say so with a big caveat. The problem we are facing is the fact that the people cannot recognize good journalism. So we have been talking about how some journalists are not responsible, just tweeting whatever sensational things that they can find because then they get more followers. And that's the kind of behavior that some journalists are showing. And even though you have this brilliant journalist spending 3 months investigating corruption among the public officials, when he or she actually publishes his or her piece, then how many people actually read that? Yes, sometimes it leads to a big national scandal and politics might change, but oftentimes it's there. If you want it, you can read it, but it's not making any changes. And that kind of same situations we have seen in so many countries. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think media literacy or news literacy education is very important. We would like to have students or future news consumers or media consumers who actually understand and identify what constitutes quality journalism. And I think we have to start from there. So it's like appreciating ballet. If you are not really introduced to that form of art, you can't really understand if you just go to like a show all of a sudden when you're 25, right? You have to know what the musics mean, what the movement means, how the story goes, so the whole thing has a certain rules in ballet or sports, basketball, cricket, whatever. If you meet somebody who's from countries where nobody plays cricket and take that person to a cricket game, probably this person gets bored because he or she doesn't know how to appreciate it. So I think journalism is in the situation where we have to train the future consumers to tell them this is what great journalism looks like. And this is how it might make a difference in our society. I think that kind of education is very important. So good journalism might solve the issue, but first of all, we have to build the audience for that good journalism, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. One of the findings that Ramati's last slide had was the challenge is that in many societies, public trust in journalists and in media has been declining. It's very, very low rates in some societies, and overall, worldwide, that's been declining. So if people can't recognize what good journalism is for the most part, and if trust levels keep dropping, what can be done? What can be done in terms of the focus of our conversation? How can you go beyond your students and your immediate circles and reach out to communities, reach out to the news consumers, and enhance their news literacy? I like that term you use, news literacy, which is more specific to journalism.
Well, I think this is where professional journalists and news literacy educators slightly differ. Of course, if I'm a working journalist, then obviously I want people to trust me. But in news literacy education, we say trust is secondary, because trust, after all, is an emotional state in your head. I trust my mother, not because she's always accurate. I trust my mother because I believe she loves me and I believe I love her. So even if she makes mistakes, even if she, I don't know, believes in some social media nonsense once in a while, that doesn't erode my trust in her. You know, if she says something to me, let's say, well, hey, the frozen food is in the fridge, and she's mistaken, and I open the fridge and there's no frozen food, I don't get mad at her and then start saying that, well, she's a liar, I will never trust her. You know, I just say, oh, she made a mistake, you know, and that's it, I move on. So I think accuracy and accountability is much more important for journalists, and especially that's more relevant in Global South. But if you look at those research, yes, overall trust is going down, but if you look at the breakdown of that trust on each media outlet, what you find is that in many countries, especially in authoritarian countries, state-controlled media has higher trust than commercial media, even though they're more running independently, right? So for example, in China, state-run media has highest trust level compared with other commercially oriented news organizations. Yes, of course, in China, probably that's you are supposed to say in the survey. So
how do you explain that finding?
Because they are ubiquitous, it's everywhere. If you turn on radio, it's always this radio news from the government. If you open newspapers, front page, second page, third page, all news comes from governmental agencies, right? And all those state-owned broadcasters in many countries, they don't just produce news. They have dramas, they have music shows. So they have lots of popular content on their stations. So if you keep watching the variety shows, music programs, drama, and then news, and moving on to another program, you just stay on the channel, right? And then it becomes habitual to listen to them, read them. So I think, again, this comes to the education part, right? So we tell the students, yeah, your gut feeling is important. Yes, you know, trust. But before you trust anybody, you should question yourself, why am I trusting this news media? Why should I trust this journalist? You know, is it because he or she is like, you know, I don't know. So I think the whole point is that when you teach critical thinking or skeptical thinking, we are telling students that, well, question yourself as well, right? And so I think, yes, trust is important, but I think more important thing is for journalists is to be always accurate and be transparent about what they know and what they don't know. So I don't know if that's making any sense. Yeah.
It does. And you have the Annie Lab at the Journalism and Media Studies Center at Hong Kong University.
Yeah.
How does it work? Does it offer hands-on experience in news literacy to just your students, or do you go beyond? What's the methodology?
Just like Ellen in the previous panel said, the ideal condition is that everybody gets trained in fact-checking. And I believe in that too. Yes, it's extremely difficult to have that kind of environment, but I think we should start from somewhere. So one of the reasons why I started separate fact-checking courses at our university and also run this daily newsroom called Annie Lab, which is actually an IFCN verified, how do you call it, verified signatory of IFCN's Code of Principles, just like Verifiles. So we do fact check at the professional level, at least we would like to think so. And so Annie Lab really works like a real newsroom. We operate Monday through Friday. I have 2 other colleagues who are in the newsroom every day, guiding students. So all the reporters are students and all the editors are teaching staff. And 3 of us take turns to sort of guide the students to produce fact-checking content for that website. And that's an extension of a university course that I teach, specifically targeting journalism students in our program. So for journalism students, we have fact-checking class. And in this class is tied to the daily newsroom. So it really like a teaching hospital model. If you're teaching future doctors, you have class, but you have also a hospital where students actually practice medicine. So we tried the same model for fact-checking with journalism students. I also teach university-wide fact-checking course, and that course is open for anybody. It doesn't matter if your major is medicine, nursing, mathematics, statistics, biology, chemistry, they can take. And normally I have around 80 to 150 students every semester. And so what I'm trying to do is to teach fact-checking skills and techniques and tools to those students who are not even considering becoming journalists. But I think that kind of skills are necessary because they will become news consumers, right? Or they are already news consumers, perhaps. And we are trying to sort of scale or bring down our curriculum to secondary schools and, if possible, primary schools as well. So we have been talking to some other educators to see how can we sort of modify what we do at the university and then change our curriculum so that high school teachers can also teach. So we are trying to make everybody a fact checker eventually, and that
Right.
love is the start. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Question for both of you, if I may. Now, I know that for journalism students or working journalists, we want them to acquire more advanced skills. But can we think of a minimum set of skills in digital and media literacy? Can we identify and define a minimum set that perhaps should be a standard to aspire to, maybe in secondary schools and elsewhere, outside schools, outside formal education completely? Just like, say, we don't necessarily train everyone to step out to the streets, the roads, and yet we have certain survival skills we've acquired through experience, lived experience from elders and others. How to safely use our roads? Doesn't always happen, but we want to. A minimum set of skills. Is it possible? Has anyone identified that? Do you know?
But it's not like driving license, right? It's not.
No, I mean,
much
it's
more difficult to define
more
what
difficult.
needs to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
such
I
a
mean,
much,
I'm not even thinking of driving. I'm thinking of the pedestrians who are the majority
Right.
on the roads. They have a certain norm.
Yes.
How do we find the digital equivalent online, especially for online disinformation? Is that possible? Is it something we should think about?
Well, in my curriculum, I emphasize on 2 things for younger audience, younger students, younger pupils. One is obviously critical thinking, because it builds on the tradition of media literacy education, right? You have to be critically assessing every piece of information you are receiving and consuming, and you should be also reflecting that on yourself, because questioning yourself is part of critical thinking, right? But that's only half the picture. The second half is the actual skill to find the correct information, which is much more difficult. Because if you just teach skepticism, if you just teach critical thinking, what happens is they don't trust anything. They don't trust that. That's what we have been talking about. You know, state-controlled media, because it's government, you don't trust it at all. They might be, they might include very useful information as well. So in news literacy education, we say, well, it doesn't matter. It comes from government or a trashy tabloid magazine. You underline every sentence and see, is this trustworthy? Is this true? Is this not true? If it's not inaccurate, where can I get accurate information? So I think that kind of way of thinking is what we need to teach in our curriculum. And again, in Global South, it's much more difficult to do so. If you're teaching in English, even Wikipedia is a good starting point.
Mm.
You know, there are lots of information about historical events, different governments' political system. It's not perfect, might contain some errors, but it's a good referencing point. Whereas in many other languages in, you know, Southeast Asia and elsewhere, Wikipedia is very weak. Oftentimes you don't even have an entry of the topic you're looking for. So when I teach in those countries, I tell them that you are the one who should create your own language Wikipedia page. So where can we find trustworthy or credible information about this historical event that happened 35 years ago in your country, right? So then most likely in the old-fashioned way of doing research, you know, hit the library, look at the encyclopedia, who's writing these entries, you know, or this professor from this university, can we contact that person? You know, so that kind of things I think might help. Yeah.
Okay, Dilrukshi, do you want to respond to that same question?
Yes, but I think he had a better explanation. But I can tell you, Nalaka, what we try to do, because that's more important. Because we also learn from the audiences as to why they would tend to follow someone or trust certain, a particular person's set of information. So what we try to, when we have our engagements, what we try to do is to have a conversation about our, through exercises, and it's a lot of engagement driven, very, very interactive kind of sessions we do, where we actually talk about our own biases. I think part of the problem is that we have to first acknowledge that each of us, just as Masato said, I trust my mother for a reason, right? Is there a reason? Or because that's my mother? So I think there is something inherent within me that I tend to trust. So, but you have to first acknowledge that it's not based on facts and figures, that it's based on emotion. So we do a lot of that to try and understand and unpack the whole concept of confirmation bias, and also why certain things happen at a certain stage. And I think context is also important. So we also discuss about contextualizing the kind of information that we deal with. For example, pandemic gave the whole world a particular context in which we had our own, hyperlocal, local, national to international scenarios. But we definitely had a situation where we all had to respond to, and we were dealing with all kinds of information where there was, as you said, infodemic. We don't know what to believe and which way to look. So yeah, so the contextualizing of the information that we have to deal with, and a lot of people also did not know what an information incident was and what information disorder was. These are my learnings from doing that program, that people first need to, we need to first have that conversation about how does it happen? Why at a particular time disinformation picks up? Election, pandemic, some local event, hyperlocal event, there is a reason. So getting to that context and not wearing, wearing your critical thinking cap at that point. These are the things that we discussed. And certainly we look to, we also like to invest in younger folk, and we also promote lateral reading, because now even if you promote things like digital tools, everybody's not going to use, right? Nobody's really, people are not going to use CrowdTangle or, start using the Wayback Machine to see, oh, when was this first posted? So,
or even do a reverse image search.
No. So so what you can do is to show that you have the tools within yourselves, that it's actually the application of your common sense. It's not really, I'm not even saying that it is going to show us major results, but you were talking about the baseline where we have some minimal understanding. So the minimal understanding can come from our own experiences where we were victims of misinformation, disinformation, and to learn from it and use those experiences next time to critically examine a situation and why information gets shared in a particular way.
Okay. So let's start taking questions. We've so far had two. The first one from Ellen is actually for Masato. She's going back to your remark on trust. She's asking, aren't accuracy and accountability, don't they contribute to being trusted? Masato?
Yes and no is my answer. I know it's unsatisfying, but yes, if the audience if people are looking for accurate, fact-based news content all the time, and if you provide that, then obviously they will trust you more than other media organizations. But I'm not quite sure that's what everybody is looking for. And I think that's what I mean by accuracy and accountability or transparency is more important perhaps than trust. And again, media research after media research, if you look at which media outlet do you trust the most among, even though overall trust is going down, if you ask those questions, even in more free democratic countries like US and some European countries, they normally trust the media they consume often more than anybody else. So, and normally in many countries, most popular media outlets is different from producing most quality journalism. So for example, yes, New York Times is doing well internationally, but if you just look at the US market, probably there are like USA Today and some other newspapers are having more subscribers. TV programs have much wider reach than newspapers in the country. And Fox News is one of the most popular TV channels. So if you ask Fox audience, they trust Fox the most. Even though Fox is known for relatively having erroneous news reporting once in a while. So I think yes and no, trust is important, but I guess when somebody, like Philippines is a good example, if somebody comes after you, I don't trust you, you are fake news, you say, well, but look at what we said. It's all fact-based, and here's the proof and here's the evidence. You don't like it? Sue us. Let's go to the court. And of course, the court has to be independent, and the judicial system has to be trustworthy. Otherwise, you have a problem. But my point here is that I think, yes, accuracy and transparency is probably more important than gaining trust. Because again, gaining trust is kind of like a popularity contest, so to speak, in media business.
And maybe it can, yeah. And I think even factors like loyalty to a particular media brand or journalist can figure in its trustworthiness. I mean, if someone has grown up with state television playing at home all the time, maybe there is some sort of a trust that has been built in without even recognizing it. Okay, there's a question from Helani to both of you. In the end, independence of journalists is related to media ownership, she says. Government ownership and concentration of that ownership can shut down dissenting media. So a competitive media landscape is important. I think we all agree on that. How do we achieve that? How do we achieve a competitive media landscape? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, has social media given everyone equal footing that therefore the former monopolies or duopolies or the domination is broken? I know it's a big topic. We can talk about it for hours and hours, but what's your quick answer? Maybe start from Dilrukshi.
It's an excellent question, Nalaka, of course. And independence of a media organization, as we all know, particularly in our part of the world, we have experienced that ownership plays a huge role. But ownership, if you unpack ownership, there is state-run. It's basically the citizens' money, right, that the state spends on maintaining those state-run media institutions. And then you also have the private media institutions. And if you think about Sri Lanka as a case study, a few years ago, because that would be the country that I know of the most, there was a time when we used to celebrate the private owned media, thinking that, they would be, there was a time when people used to think that the private media was a little better than state-run media. But I think right now, the situation has completely reversed, because the ownership model has come to show us that it's more, more politically in intention and agenda driven, and or business interest driven, and they actually are definitely the villains of the piece in today's context. So things have changed so much. So when we have the social media platforms and news platforms, particularly news platforms, online news platforms, we we thought there would be a space, and there was a space for people to go and publish themselves without the kind of editorial dictates that would come from ownership and editorial management. And this was something I again remember that there was a time of celebrating this newfound freedom about a decade or more ago, and it was true. But right now, why we are having the discussion is also because of the role of gatekeeping. I think it's also partly it's the ownership, and there is also a role of the gatekeepers. If you talk about the tweet and the sharing and the kind of viral post, there is a new discussion that we are having about gatekeeping. Of course, there is no gatekeeping for social media, and that is why we like that, and that is why people think that that has allowed people to come and express themselves freely. So that's a very complex answer to your question. It doesn't really answer it in any way, but the models have to change. But of course, the state, the kind of authoritarian states that we have can always come after you if you are an independent media organization, big or small. And this is something organizations will have to live with. And probably you have to look at hybrid models where you cannot exist in your country. Sometimes there would be stressful times where you probably need to look at ways in which you still continue to publish and share content, because if you live in certain kinds of places, it's not going to be easy. The state can come after you, or the business interests can come after you. Your media owners can come after you.
Masato, where you sit in Hong Kong, this is a big concern in recent times, isn't it? So
Yeah.
where does media ownership factor come into this discussion?
Well, if you are talking about Hong Kong, certainly we are feeling a big change. And we are, in my personal view, moving towards a system more akin to what they have in mainland China, and where independent media doesn't really exist. Under the Communist Party, I mean, in the communist system, not just China, Vietnam too, all media outlets belong to the party, essentially. So that's the system they have in China. And social media is not a level playing ground in mainland China. As you guys know, internet is not freely accessible. They have a great firewall. There's limitations for internet users in China, what they can access, what they cannot access. And increasingly, many governments are following that, footstep. So I think the situation is becoming harder and harder, not just in Hong Kong and China, but in many other countries or in neighboring countries as well. And I think that's trend is going to continue. One way to fight as an educator was to talk about this in class. So I teach how the censorship works in Vietnam, how censorship system works in China, or in Singapore. There are differences between the way countries censor content, who's responsible for this. So we actually try to give students some knowledge about how censorship works, or how countries like Finland, which always enjoys probably freest, So one TV program that I sometimes show to my students, news programs in, I think it was Denmark, where journalists invite politicians in the studio and then ask really tough questions to the politicians, and politicians were given to prepare for those tough questions in advance. So he also brings, or she also brings some data, and then try to debate with the journalist, and it's really entertaining. And many of the students would say, this will never happen in my country. There's no way journalists can bring in the country's head in the studio and grill them in front of the public, so, but by showing that, students realize that could happen if the political situation changed in their country, right? So at least I think I'm trying to show what's possible if, press freedom and commercial media is a bit more empowered compared with what they're seeing in the daily life. So I think that kind of sort of knowledge and awareness might eventually bring the change in 20, 30 years when those students become in charge of the society. I'm not sure, but I think talking about it in the class is very important. If you stop talking about it, then, that's the end of the story, I think. yeah.
There's a question from Ramati, again to both of you. What would you say is the best way to measure learning outcomes or the effectiveness when it comes to teaching digital media, digital literacy or media literacy or news literacy? How do you know that we've achieved something?
Nalaka, so
Yeah.
I can give you very simple examples from the experience I have. And it's twofold. One is the individual behavior. When we learn about people who tell us, and I've had a lot of testimonials of that nature, where people do say, for the first time, it made me think. And I really appreciate that, because actually the change takes place within you first, and then only you can influence another person. And we have heard people who tell us that particular exercise, that particular situation, particularly this was common whenever we discussed information incidents and what influences your thinking during a particular context. And I've had people who gave us feedback saying that first I started thinking about situations, and I've definitely paused before sharing. That thing we have, sharing as received, that irresponsible thing we do, we say, we also have a disclaimer, right? Adding to it, we edit and say, it's we share it as received. So we've just exonerated ourselves of any responsibility of sharing that information and also the contents of the information. So now this is problematic. So people have told us, we have stopped doing that. We have actually tried to think about it, read up a bit, do a bit of a Google search at least to try and see. So for me, those are the small ways in which I measure. The second one is about the targeted trainings we have done for journalists, for them to become fact checkers. When they come and say, can we now go back to our newsrooms? We have had a few. We have trained about 30 people, not a lot. But when they say that they feel confident enough to go and share the tools that they learned about in their own small news ecosystems in their newsrooms, and to at least train a colleague, and to also mentor. You can actually do a little bit of mentoring than training. In newsrooms, I think it's more about sharing that experience and saying, just go check it, right? So this is how we have all got oriented into verifying information long before we got to using tools. So that is happening. And I do also hear sometimes from newsrooms that where they say, we have thought about setting up a fact check. There are a couple of newsrooms participated in our programs, have said that they would want to at least train their news desks to have some basic digital literacy with regard to using digital tools. So this is how, these are very simple, very modest ways of measuring, but for the moment, that's what I could say.
Masato, how do you measure effectiveness?
Well, there are two types of effectiveness, right? Long term and short term. And the short term effectiveness, just like, she said, basically you can test before and after. Maybe behavioral change you can easily observe. You can even test them on lateral reading, or you can give them, a tweet and then ask them to fact check and see how quickly they can find out if it's true or not. So those kind of tests can be done quite easily. And as a university course, I have to test my students and assess their performance. So in short term, you can clearly see the difference and measure the effectiveness of your teaching. In the long run, that's the difficult part. And some researchers in the US, they have this scale whether or not students will register for voting in the election in 3 years after graduation, or how often do they sort of join the community, whatever event that is important for that local, community. But I think the long-term effect is very difficult to measure, because if you are really doing well as an educator, not just you, but many schools, many teachers, as a society, if you're teaching critical thinking, better fact-checking skills, if everybody's doing that, it becomes common sense. So nobody would come back and say, well, it was because of this education I do this. It's no longer the case. It's more like washing hands before you eat, or flush the toilet after you go. It's almost like everybody does it. So nobody would say, well, everybody flushes the toilet thanks to the education. They don't say that because it's already what everybody does. And I think ultimately you want to be there, you go there.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
That's the aim. That's the aim. We have 5 minutes left. So if anyone wants to pose questions in chat or even put up your hand, we can do that. And meanwhile, I just want to ask both of you one question. If you had, let's say, because funding was something mentioned in the last panel and it's going to be tackled again tomorrow. If you had $100 to invest in strategies to counter the information disorder in the global south, how much of it would you allocate for training, promoting digital and media literacy? How much of the $100 and why?
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go first, maybe.
Yes.
I would say 20-80, $20 on training journalists and funding media organizations.
Okay.
80% goes to education. I would like
Why?
media because I think I'm more concerned about the current trend, and I think it's important to educate the future generation to change the current trend. I'm a bit pessimistic about my generation. They're not going to change, you know. But kids might have, no, I mean, we often say that nobody is born racist. But once you become a racist, it's really difficult to not to, you know, become racist, you know. So
Yeah.
we have to strike the iron before they turn into something. And that's why I think education is really important. And I think every, in my ultimate goal, if it's not $100 but the 100 million US dollars, then maybe I would spend that money to make media literacy training or teacher fact checking as part of a teacher certification program. So every public school teacher has to be trained in media literacy and fact checking.
Okay.
That way
All
they
with
can,
that $20.
Yeah.
Dilrukshi, very quickly, how much and why?
Okay, maybe I'll give 50 to Anilab, maybe.
Thank you. Yes, we need that.
Actually, Nalaka would spend half of that clearly to work with newsrooms to the best of my ability to get at least a few newsrooms alerted, aware, you know, so that because I work in that ecosystem, so I have to make some investment there. So the other 50, I'm also a little pessimistic about our generation, and I think we need to put some money in the next generation of news consumers. So I'd probably look for about 5 to 10 very interesting young, probably teenagers who are you know, who are very, very avid consumers of news, and give them or support them to set up something that looks a little like the Teen Fact Check, where so that they can tell us how they will find solutions as opposed to looking for solutions to a problem that we have created problem.
Okay, we have a late breaking question that's come from Ibrahim Roman. For the layman, if we must choose, he is asking, must we choose between oligopoly or monopoly of news broadcasters that are always siding with the incumbent, or citizen journalism, which is not always credible? I mean, I would personally prefer not to have to choose between these two, but what would our panel say? If you had to choose, that's the question. That will be our last question too.
Strike the middle ground, because, well, everyone is peddling interests either way, both groups would be. So I think you probably have to exercise critical thinking and take everything with a pinch of salt. So information, there will be two or more avenues, right? So I cannot say that choose this over the other. We wouldn't be having this discussion if that was such an easy decision for us to make.
Masato?
Yeah, I want to echo that. I mean, if, you know, it's impossible to choose, we need to both in a way. I wouldn't call it the oligopoly or monopoly, but we do need, big media organizations that we can kind of trust in the sense that they're not gonna, give us completely fabricated news stories. But having said that, if you have monopoly, I think this also answers to another question in the chat box about the system in Japan. In Japan, what we have is monopoly. Traditional news media is very strong. They have this press club system, which is very exclusive club for selected journalists. And many non-member journalists struggle in the country. And that's one of the reasons why their press freedom index goes down and down and down every year. So, so monopoly isn't necessarily helping the society either. But having said that, we do need some big media organizations at the same time. So they need to coexist to a certain degree. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we increasingly have to look at this information as an ecosystem where there are different beings, different processes that are coexisting, as you just said, Masato. So thank you, Dilrukshi, thank you, Masato, for your insights, for your answers to some very big questions. Like a good panel, we've raised more questions than we've answered. Maybe some of these can be picked up tomorrow. Back to you, Ramati and Lanesha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Thank you so much, everybody, for your participation today. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, panelists, for your great discussions. Thank you, audience members, for sitting in this afternoon. And we'll be back tomorrow again, same time in Universal Coordinated Time. We will start again at 7:30 a.m. So that's 7:30 a.m. Universal Coordinated Time, 1 p.m. India Standard Time for those joining in Sri Lanka. So we'll have 3 programs tomorrow, one on to hear the view of funders and networks. So hopefully that will be an interesting discussion. I know several of you talked about funding in your panel. So hopefully we can pick up some of these themes tomorrow. Then on the issue of law and regulation and their intersection with the information disorder and freedom of expression. And then we'll have a final panel on researching and reporting on the information disorder. So hope to see you back tomorrow. Thank you so much for all your participation today and have a great rest of your day. Bye.